Hey, yo, White Sox fans. NWI Steve here, rolling solo for the Not So Sunday Fun Day edition of the Sox on Tap podcast here. We're going to cover a lot of different things here today. We're not going to focus a lot on what we saw during the course of this week on the field. I feel like the greatest thing that we need to talk about collectively as a group and as a fan base here is what took place off the field, because there's a lot of things that happened here as the Major League Baseball trade deadline was at 5 o'clock this past Tuesday. We saw Sox active on a couple of different fronts, Monday and Tuesday of this week. And we heard some backstage rumblings about the future of White Sox manager Pedro Grifol. So that's the more pressing issues that we're going to need to discuss here. We'll talk a little bit about what happened on the field, but we're not going to spend a great deal of time on that because, well, the losing streak has reached 20 games, an unfathomable 20 games, and it's really quite embarrassing for anyone that is associated with or actually follows or gives a shit about this team. So I don't know how much time we really want to dig into that, if we're being completely honest with ourselves, because we see it every day. It's been almost a month since this team has won a baseball game. It's really crazy to think about that here in the year of our Lord 2024. That this team has lost 20 consecutive games. And this is just a few short weeks after setting a then franchise record with their 14 consecutive losses that they had late May into early June. But they have eclipsed that, and they are on the precipice of history as they are just 3 losses away from tying the 1961 Philadelphia Phillies for the longest losing streak in Major League history. So they do have an opportunity here to reach some historic futility later on this coming week. And we'll talk about that. We'll kind of preview what we've got upcoming for this group as they will head out to the West Coast following this disaster up in Canada South this afternoon at the hands of the Minnesota Twins. Before we dig into all of that, though, be sure you're going to ontapsportsnet.com for all your latest Chicago sports literature and podcasting needs. You can get up-to-date information on some of the transactions that took place involving our White Sox over the course of this week leading up to the trade deadline, some injury news that we have to discuss that is pretty pertinent to the long-term future of this team, and some of the rumors and speculation that are circling around this team right now here. So let's talk about it here. Let's just get the cat out of the bag as quickly as we can. 0-6 week for this team. As I mentioned in the lead up here, 20 consecutive losses. And this was not a particularly competitive week for this team as part of that 0-6 stretch right there. They were outscored 22-11 in a 3-game sweep at home at the hands of the Kansas City Royals. And then they followed that up by getting outscored 29-11 in a 3-game sweep up in Minnesota at Target Field. The Sox have lost 19 of their last 21 games against the division rival Minnesota Twins here. Really quite embarrassing if you think about it. And for all the embarrassment that is surrounding this team with regards to its futility and inability to win baseball games and just all the things that we see from a statistical standpoint being shoved in our faces on national broadcasts, on the local broadcast, sports talk radio, to drop 19 of 21 to your most hated division rival, that's just, I think, the ultimate kick in the nuts right there from a situation that just continues to get worse. I've had this conversation with Anthony. I've had this conversation with a lot of people, family and friends. When you think things are as bad as they can possibly be for our Chicago White Sox, just remember they can always and almost assuredly will almost always get worse. So disastrous week for this team. It's been really a disastrous, season, obviously, as they stand now 27-87, a unfathomable 60 games under 500. I caught a couple minutes of the post-game show here. Chuck was having a conversation with Ozzy and Big Frank, and he said that they were only 40 games under 500, to which Frank had to correct Chuck that the team was, in fact, 60 games below 500. I can't even imagine in my wildest dreams to think that I would live to see a baseball team be 60 games under 500. But here we are right now, 27-87. 20 consecutive losses here. It's a comedy of errors at this point. And just everything that can possibly go wrong on a baseball team or on a baseball field is happening for this team right now here as we sit on August the 4th of 2024, 27 and 87. Again, we're talking historic futility here. They are on pace to surpass the 1962 New York Mets for the worst season in modern Major League Baseball history here. And taking a look at the schedules, I've talked about on the last couple of shows that we've done here, things don't look particularly good. If you take a look at the schedule here, it's really hard to find more than 6 to 7 wins on this schedule here. I have a very difficult time looking at this thing and finding 16 more wins on this schedule so that this team does not lose 120 games. I just don't know where they're going to come from at this point. You see them finding different ways to lose on an almost daily basis. More oftentimes than not, it's an inability to score runs. But you look at a game like today when they go out there and they actually score 7 runs. Well, Chris Flexen put the team in an 8-0 deficit by the second inning there, and this ball game was essentially over. And you could basically wrap it up and send it to Cooperstown, as Hall of Fame broadcaster Hawk Harrelson used to say, ensuring the 20th consecutive loss for this team here. So, again, another disastrous week for this team, 20 in a row. Can't stress it enough just how pathetic and embarrassing everything surrounding the 2024 White Sox is at this point. And it just doesn't seem to be getting any better. There are no real silver linings that we are seeing with this team at any point. And, you know, we're grasping at straws right now on an almost daily basis here to try to find something that isn't overly negative surrounding this baseball team, but it's just getting harder and harder as time continues to pass with each day that goes on here. So that's really all I want to talk about as far as what we saw from the on-the-field action this week. Like I said, 0-6, getting outscored 51-22, not overly competitive games in these 6 losses. And, well, they're getting ready to get themselves on a plane and go out to the West Coast for a 3-game series against the Oakland A's. Their final trip to the Oakland Coliseum, a place that they never play well. So be sure to be on the lookout for that here as we get some late West Coast action to kick off the week. So as they like to say, the beatings will continue until morale improves. So that's where we're at right now as Sox fans. Let's focus more so, guys, on the bigger picture things that are happening with this team right now. Tuesday, 5 p.m. was the Major League Baseball trade deadline that happened. And on Monday, we saw a very big 3-team deal involving the Sox, the St. Louis Cardinals, and the Los Angeles Dodgers. From my perspective, a really perplexing deal on a number of different fronts here, as the Dodgers received Tommy Edman, utility player from the St. Louis Cardinals, along with Michael Kopech, right-handed reliever who had been closing some games for this team, or at least trying to close games for this team at various points during the course of this season, and a player to be named later coming from the St. Louis Cardinals. The Cardinals, the clear-cut winners of this deal here, received Eric Fetty, probably the most realistic trade asset that the Sox had coming into this season, given the Garrett Crochet saga and Luis Roberts' struggles and health issues that he's endured this season. So Eric Fetty going to the St. Louis Cardinals, along with Tommy Pham going back to St. Louis, the place where he started his big league career. So both players getting out of there, at least going to competitive situations where they'll be in a position to compete for a playoff spot. So that has to be a welcome sight for both of those players here to know that they are out of this toxic mess that has just engulfed this organization for seemingly far too long now at this point, and only getting worse by the day. For the Sox efforts in this, they've received 3 players from the Los Angeles Dodgers, the headliner being Miguel Vargas, a kind of utility type player of sorts who's played a variety of different positions in his brief cup of coffees that he's had with the Los Angeles Dodgers. He's spent time at second base, third base, and left field, not playing any position particularly well. He was the headliner of this deal. He was a player that was a top 50 prospect heading into last season and was really positioned to be the everyday second baseman for a Dodgers team heading into 2023. And they seemingly have, well, not seemingly, they have obviously moved on from him, and he didn't factor into their plans long-term here. As, you know, the Dodgers, given their wealth of resources and their prospect pipeline that they have available here, they deemed Miguel Vargas to be someone that was expendable because the offensive production just simply wasn't there. There's a lot of swing and miss in his game since getting the call to the major leagues, and the defensive ineptitude, maybe ineptitude is a little bit too strong a word, but the lack of consistency across any defensive position there really was something that in their eyes made him expendable and not part of their long-term plans, to the point where they even felt that acquiring a utility player of veteran status, someone that is injured, the likes of Tommy Edman, made more sense for them in their quest to win their first non-Mickey Mouse World Series since 1988. So very interesting. Sox also did receive two prospects from the Dodgers, middle infielder Yorel Perez and Alexander Albertus, who in typical White Sox fashion is going to miss the remainder of the season due to a stress reaction in his tibia. So he's officially already a White Sox. He's already on the injured list here and shut down for the season. Sox will also be receiving a player to be named later from the Dodgers in this deal here. The thing that's really perplexing to me about this trade overall is just the fact that the St. Louis Cardinals are the clear-cut winners in this deal, and really all they did was give up Tommy Edman and a player to be named later. It's fascinating to me how they were able to get two players to automatically add to their major league roster for their push towards a playoff spot and didn't really give up anything of significant value to this point. How they were able to pull that off is really beyond me. The Dodgers obviously feel that they are going to be able to find some things in Michael Kopech and tweak him. We did see with Kopech, once he finally started listening to Brian Bannister over the course of the last 7 to 10 days he spent in a White Sox uniform and stopped throwing about 80% four-seam fastballs, we did see some improved results from him, something that I wrote about earlier on in the season over at OnTapSportsNet.com. You can feel free to go to the website and check that out for the analysis I provided on that topic as far as Michael Kopech's pitch usage. But at the end of the day, the Dodgers obviously feel that Michael Kopech's arm was enough to warrant bringing into their bullpen, and he did have a solid debut for them earlier on this week. A lot of talk surrounding Kopech leading up to the trade deadline and people thinking that he was going to be a valuable trade chip because teams like the Dodgers were going to just look at the arm talent alone, and we're just going to see that and say, hey, this is somebody that we get him into our organization, out of this toxic environment on the south side of Chicago here, get a better analytics staff around him, and maybe some better messaging on the importance of mixing up his pitch usage, that it would lead to some improved results. And obviously the Dodgers, decided to pull the trigger on that deal. I had a lot of back and forth discussions with some people, basically kind of letting them know that, look, the fact of the matter is, yes, I'm sure there's teams out there like the Dodgers that felt that getting him into their organization, they would be able to make the necessary tweaks and turn him into a viable late inning reliever, not necessarily in a ninth inning type role, but a high leverage reliever, just given the stuff itself. And there was a lot of disagreement going back and forth in some circles on White Sox Twitter and various social media platforms about what type of return the Sox would get. And at the end of the day, the results did matter for Michael Kopech. I never felt that they were going to get a high value return for him, just given the struggles that he had over the course of the season and the inconsistency that they had. It's very clear that a team like the Dodgers and probably other contending teams out there saw Kopech as someone that they could turn around, but only at their price. Given the struggles that he has had in this season, they weren't going to mortgage anything of significant value for him because they could just very easily point to the stat sheet and say, hey, the results have not been there. This doesn't warrant a higher return than X player or part of X package that we have put together here. And ultimately, that's what it turned out to be here, as he went to the Los Angeles Dodgers and is now going to see October baseball again for the first time since 2021 out on the West Coast. And, it wouldn't shock me at all if he did see some success pitching for the Dodgers here for the rest of this season and into next year. But he's no longer part of the White Sox organization here. He was one of the centerpieces of the deal that sent Chris Sale to the Boston Red Sox in December of 2016. He was the second piece after Yoan Moncada, a top 100 prospect at the time of the acquisition. I think we can all say that Michael Kopech did not live up to the expectations that were placed upon him when he arrived in the White Sox organization. His call-up that he had in August of 2018 was electric. It did create a lot of buzz within the fan base and in the ballpark when he did take the mound. But then the Tommy John surgery, the sitting out of the 2020 shortened COVID season, and all the myriad of off-field issues just really led to, I think, a souring of the fan base on Michael Kopech in general here, and the inconsistent performance on the field following 2022 when he transitioned into the starting rotation. Things just didn't go well for Michael Kopech following that transition back to the bullpen here this year in 2024, and things just didn't really work out. So I think we can resoundingly say that the Michael Kopech era was a disappointment on the south side of Chicago here. Unfortunately, like I said, one of the main pieces of the deal that sent Chris Sale to the Boston Red Sox in December of 2016. The other focal point of that deal, Yoan Moncada, has not taken the field since early April of this season here, and it's safe to say at this point that trade was an unmitigated disaster for the White Sox. And Moncada, when his option is declined this coming winter, I think in a lot of ways that will kind of put an exclamation point on that deal in particular, and really the genesis of Rebuild 2.0 and the failures that subsequently followed. So really disappointing to see Michael Kopech's career with the White Sox turn out the way it did. We can close that chapter of White Sox history now and move on from that. As far as other deadline moves that happened here, and I was very surprised to see this next one happen as I was up in Milwaukee earlier on this week for businesses. I was sitting in my hotel before I got to actually go and take in some competitive baseball as my Bars took on the first place Milwaukee Brewers up at American Family Field in Milwaukee. But sitting as the trade deadline was approaching, watching ESPN and seeing that the Baltimore Orioles swung a deal for Eloy Jimenez, as the Sox would send $4 million to Baltimore that could pick up an additional $1.5 million kicked over to the Orioles here should they decline his 2024 option, his 2025 option, which I assume they will. So in total, it looks like it will probably be about $5.5 million being exchanged from the Sox to the Orioles there. That basically just covers the remaining portion of his salary for the 2024 season and a little bit of the declined option for next year. In exchange for that, the Sox received 26-year-old left-handed reliever Trey McGow. McGow's a guy that's actually pitched pretty well in the Orioles system here, across 56 in the third innings pitched in AA and AAA. This season he's pitched a 1.92 ERA with 9.4 Ks per nine, so striking out a little bit more than a batter per inning here. Again, old for the level here, being 26 years old, but this is somebody that, given the revolving door that we've seen in the White Sox bullpen this year and will undoubtedly see into the future, this is the flyer that you take at this point here. I think if anything else, it's more so just about getting Eloy Jimenez off of the 40-man roster. And again, closing the book on one of the other important deals of Rebuild 2.0's. Eloy was really the centerpiece of the deal that sent Jose Quintana across town in July of 2017. Eloy, as I highlighted in a piece earlier on in the week over at ontapsportsnet.com, kind of eulogizing the end of the Eloy Jimenez era, the inconsistency that plagued him, as well as the injuries that were far too often. I talked about in the piece, Eloy only played in 61% of the possible games that he could have while on the White Sox active roster after getting called up for opening day of 2019. So really disappointing as far as his lack of availability, but just the inconsistency that we saw from him offensively. Through that first two seasons, roughly 730 plate appearances in 2019 and the COVID-shortened 2020 season, he looked like he was going to be a middle-of-the-order presence for this team and someone that you could pencil into the middle part of this lineup and be a significant run producer for what we all thought was going to be one of the best offenses in the sport for years to come. Sadly, we know that did not happen. The myriad of injuries that plagued Eloy, mainly soft tissue, lower body injuries, hamstring, groin, calf issues that frequently found him on the injured list, just never allowed him to be the offensive player that he showed through those first two seasons in a White Sox uniform from 2021 through the deal that took place earlier on in this week. He just was never the same player. And He had that brief little hot stretch, about 2.5 months following the All-Star break in 2022 through the end of the season, where he had a 169 weighted runs created plus over the final. I think it was maybe 236 or so plate appearances to close out that season there. And we looked like, and we thought, hey, we're getting back to that guy. We're getting back that middle of the order presence that is so desperately needed. And once opening day came last year, the Eloy Ground Ball Factory was open for business perpetually. We've talked about it a lot on these airwaves here, hitting close to a 60% ground ball clip over the course of the last 2 months here, and just never being able to drive the ball with any kind of consistency. And for a player that is relegated to being a DH because he was a danger to himself out there on the field as well as his teammates frequently, there just wasn't enough offense there from Eloy. So again, I think we can all say that the Eloy Jimenez era on the south side of Chicago was a disappointment, to be nice. You could say it was a disaster in many ways. Unrealized potential and expectations, far too frequent. We have said those words to describe what we thought was going to be a golden era of White Sox baseball. One of the key centerpieces of that era, along with Michael Kopech, is now gone. So Eloy Jimenez, goodbye, good riddance. Enjoy Baltimore for the next 2 months. I'm sure you're going to be looking for a job come this winter, because I can't envision the Orioles picking up an $18 million option on you here. So, wouldn't shock me to see him maybe go sign with the Miami Marlins down in South Florida on a 1 year, minimum, or not league minimum salary, but a lower salary deal here to try to restore some level of value. But, Eloy just wasn't the guy that he was supposed to be when he was here in a White Sox uniform, and it's, really disappointing to see. The third and final deal that took place, really a very minor deal here. Paul DeJong switching dugouts on Tuesday afternoon, going across the field, joining the Kansas City Royals as they are continuing their push towards the playoffs, as they are just on the outside looking in of the American League playoff picture at this moment. Sox sent the veteran shortstop infielder to the division rival Royals for right-handed pitcher Harold Rosado, who was a 22-year-old minor leaguer in high A ball this season, striking out 10.4 batters per 9. But again, this is a lotto ticket reliever. That's all you're going to get for Paul DeJong. That's all you were really ever going to get. Who knows? Maybe Brian Bannister and the rest of the pitching infrastructure can turn this guy into someone that can be a part of the bullpen in a couple of years. That's all you can hope for at this point. You're not getting anything of significance for a player of Paul DeJong's ilk at this point. Sox trading away their leading home run hitter. DeJong had 18 home runs while in a White Sox uniform this season. And as we've seen, for much of the last couple of weeks, power is definitely devoid on this team. And now you take DeJong away from this roster here. These final 2 months are going to be tough to watch, to say the least here. And the offensive fireworks at the ballpark are going to be very minimal at best, especially given the struggles that we're seeing from Luis Robert Jr. right now. I know he had a double in there today, but he just simply has not looked particularly good and consistent since coming back from the injured list about a month or so ago. And with really a complete lack of protection around him, it wouldn't shock me to see these final 2 months get kind of ugly for Eloy. Wouldn't surprise me at all to see him really expanding his strike zone a lot, swinging a lot of pitches out of the zone. We're seeing that already here as he's flailing away at sliders down outside the strike zone. And I would expect that to continue because there really isn't anybody else in this lineup that is going to scare opposing pitchers. I know Noodle Boy was able to hit a home run and a double here today, but, at the end of the day, nobody's afraid of pitching to Andrew Benintendi. That's just what it is. Andrew Benintendi is a byproduct of what I wrote about yesterday over at OnTapSportsNet.com, the Eloy effect and the chain reaction of events that took place from Eloy Jimenez not being the player that he was supposed to be when he was acquired from the Crosstown Cubs just a little bit over 7 years ago. And really, that chain reaction manifested itself in a number of different ways because of Eloy's inability to stay on the field, to be a consistent run producer in the middle part of the order. It caused a lot of things to happen with this organization that have really set them back a number of years and will continue to set them back well into the future. Really, the genesis of it all started that fateful March afternoon in 2021 when he tore his pectoral muscle, inexplicably trying to rob a home run ball during a Cactus League game that sidelined him for more than half the season. That ultimately caused the team to rush 2019 first-round draft pick, number 3 pick overall, Andrew Vaughn, up to the major leagues without even seeing pitching above high A Winston-Salem and transitioning him to a position in left field that he had never played before. We've all seen Andrew Vaughn over at first base, not a particularly athletic player, to say the least. And then this team, because they couldn't decide to round out a roster by going out and acquiring a veteran bat to be the DH left fielder, they moved a guy to a new position that never saw pitching above high A. And I still maintain that that was the biggest thing that stunted Andrew Vaughn's development and is a big part of the reason why he has been the bust that he has been since joining the White Sox for that 2021 season. But it doesn't just stop there. Gavin Sheets being played out of position consistently, seeing a lot of time in both corner outfield spots and at the DH position as well. Then you factor in the Jose Abreu conundrum following the 2022 season. Now, odds are there's a good chance Jose Abreu was going to leave anyway, but the playing time issue that took place when you had the likes of Andrew Vaughn, Jose Abreu, and Eloy Jimenez out there in the same lineup, coupled with Gavin Sheets, you just had too many of the same guy, and too many of the same guy not producing. So then what does Rick Hahn and Ken Williams decide to do to further compound the problem? Well, because Eloy couldn't be trusted to stand out in left field and just be a mediocre major league left fielder, they went out and they issued the largest contract in franchise history to Andrew Benintendi to the tune of 5 years and $75 million. And we've all seen what that has looked like here through the first, year and a half plus of this 5-year deal. It's going to go down as one of the worst free agent deals in major league history. And this is all a chain reaction because of Eloy and his inability to stay on the field and produce like the guy he was supposed to be. And this all started, like I said, in March of 2020 and 21, and it has been a downward spiral ever since. So if you want to go and check out the full column, take a look over at ontapsportsnet.com right there, the Eloy effect. Went really deep into detail there as far as the chain reaction of events that Eloy Jimenez ultimately caused his team. But he's gone now. He's no longer our problem. Who knows? Maybe the Orioles and their infrastructure and their development team is able to unlock something in his swing, get him to change his swing plane and elevate the baseball a little bit more. It wouldn't shock me. Given the success that organization has had from a development standpoint there. A lot of guys from the Houston Astros have transitioned there over to Baltimore, and we saw last year an Orioles team that won 100 games, and they are fighting for the American League East Division title once again. So who knows, with a couple of tweaks, Eloy could be a viable major league hitter. He's off to a pretty solid start to his first 2 games with the Orioles, going 5 for 7 this weekend against former division rival Cleveland. So Eloy, Sox will see him later on this year when they go to Baltimore, and it wouldn't shock me if he kind of goes off in that series when the Sox are out there later on this year. So overall, I would say it was a rather uneventful and in some ways disappointing trade deadline for this team. There was a lot of speculation leading up to it about Garrett Crochet, really probably the most valuable and most highly sought after trade piece on this roster here, but given the demands that were made by his agency and were made public over, say, the last 7 to 10 days leading up to the trade deadline about an acquiring team needing to offer him a contract extension in order for him to pitch in the postseason. Tony and I talked about this on the show last week. I think a lot of that was just posturing from his agency side of it and just trying to create a little bit of leverage in a situation when Garrett Crochet and his representation really didn't have much of any. So I know a lot of people were upset about the fact that they didn't move Garrett Crochet and thinking that this ultimately is going to tank his value going into the offseason. I disagree with that. They're still going to obviously entertain offers for him over the winter, and I think it is a high likelihood that he does get moved at some point before opening day of 2025. It doesn't even have to be at the winter meetings. It doesn't have to be, over the winter itself. It could happen when pitchers and catchers report, similar to what we saw with Dylan Cease this past year. I talk about this all the time. You see starting pitching injuries happen each and every season. Every year when pitchers and catchers report to spring training, there's always injuries that happen to contending teams. Teams always need pitching when they didn't anticipate needing it when they reported to camp. So these kinds of things can happen. And with that being said, if Garrett Crochet's arm does hold up, if he is able to make it through the end of this season, even though we are starting to see a decreased workload from him, I think that the Sox will ultimately get a good return for Garrett Crochet here, as long as he doesn't completely, piss down his leg these final 2 months from a performance level standpoint here. If we see performance in line with what he has displayed to this point here on August the 4th, I would expect the Sox to get a very nice return for him before opening day of next season. So for any fans out there that are fretting about a potential return, saying that not moving him now is going to tank his value going into the future, I vehemently disagree with that. And I think that ultimately this team will get a sound return for Garrett Crochet. It didn't happen here today. I think the variables and the uncertainty of teams being concerned about the extension rumor and not pitching in the postseason without that, I think probably did scare off some teams. Although, as I talked about last Sunday with Tony, I find it hard to believe that if Dave Dombrowski had swung a deal for him, I can't envision Garrett Crochet going into that locker room in Philadelphia with Bryce Harper, Trey Turner, Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, Nick Castellanos, JT Realmuto, and a host of other veterans saying, "Nah, guys, I'm good. I'll see you in Clearwater in February." To me, as a competitor, as someone that was a former pitcher myself, I just can't envision a guy doing that. But that's a discussion now that we can table here for the offseason. And like I said, I would be very shocked if Garrett Crochet does throw a pitch for the White Sox in 2025. Whenever that deal comes, could happen in November, could happen in December at the winter meetings, might not happen until late March before pitchers and catchers break camp to go north for the beginning of the season. But I would not expect to see Garrett Crochet throw a pitch for the 2025 Chicago White Sox. The other, I would say, significant veteran piece that there was some discussion about was Luis Robert Jr. And look, at the end of the day, the struggles that he has had in the batter's box over the course of the last couple of weeks, the elevated strikeout rate, and given his questionable health history that he has had since joining the team in 2020, probably deterred most teams. And given the 3.5 years of contractual control that he does still have, there would still be a high asking price for him. So I think what the Sox have to hope for at this point with Luis Robert Jr. is that he closes the year strong and is able to help build up some of that surplus trade value going into the offseason here. So at the end of the day, those are really the two main pieces that this team has left at this juncture. We are full scale rebuild mode, folks. Things are really, really bad. And I don't know when this thing is going to get better, honestly. I thought that there was an outside shot with some of the improvements that are happening with the pitching infrastructure down at the minor league level that maybe you could have this thing ready by 2026 to maybe be a fringe playoff team. I don't see that right now. There is just a complete lack of position player talent down at the minor leagues. Colson Montgomery is just not hitting down in AAA Charlotte in a very offensive environment. We're seeing a strikeout rate at close to 30%. And for a lot of people that were kind of hailing him as the next franchise messiah, I think need to take a step back here and realize that there are a lot of concerns about Colson Montgomery right now. Edgar Caro, who came over from the Angels in the deal that sent Lucas Giolito to the West Coast a year ago, has performed well. To the point where he recently was promoted to AAA Charlotte. Been a little bit of uneven performance for him since joining the Knights. Nice plate discipline. He is drawing his walks, not striking out a ton here, but the offensive production hasn't been what you would anticipate it being in, like I said, a very offensive environment down there at Truist Ballpark down in downtown Charlotte. So Edgar Carroll, I personally wouldn't even be surprised if we do not see him at all here in 2024. Maybe if he gets on a little bit of a heater here over the course of the next month, whatever that cutoff point is to where the Sox would be able to maintain rookie eligibility for him heading into 2025, maybe at that point they give him a brief cup of coffee to close out the season here. But I don't even know if I would do that at this point, just given how toxic this overall environment is right now. Things are really bad, obviously. Hence, you've lost 20 in a row. You're 60 games below 500. It's not a good environment, and it's not necessarily an environment that you want to see guys that you are hopeful will be part of a long-term future for this team to have to be around and have to get their first taste of major league action. So it's just really concerning right now. And, circling back to Miguel Vargas, the centerpiece of the deal that the Sox received from the Dodgers here earlier on in the week. This is a guy that, like I said, the Dodgers, seemingly gave up on him at this point. He's spent most of the year down in AAA Oklahoma City, and this team was willing to make a deal for Tommy Edman, a utility player that is on the injured list right now, instead of bringing up Miguel Vargas to potentially play at the major league level for a team that has serious World Series aspirations. Vargas is a guy that has a lot of swing and miss in his game. He has shown some good plate discipline in the sense that he will take his walks. He has shown some power. He did hit a home run in Minnesota over the course of this weekend here, but the early returns have not been great for him in his first 5 games with the Sox overall. This is a guy that if you look at his splits and some of his data since getting called up to the major leagues, has struggled against right-handed pitching. And that's been a problem for this team for a number of years. And that's something that, if they are ever going to be a competitive team again, are going to have to figure out. They're going to have to crack the code on how they perform better offensively against right-handed pitching across the board. And this is an organizational issue from the top all the way down to the bottom. I've talked about this on a number of different occasions. This organization needs to go out and find their Brian Bannister on the hitting side. They need to have somebody that can come in here and instill an organizational philosophy on how this team can get back to being good offensively, having a consistent offensive approach from the very bottom levels of the minor leagues all the way to the corner of 35th and Shields. Until they do that with consistency, we're not going to see this team being competitive. We're not going to see them playing fun, exciting baseball at the corner of 35th and Shields. It's frustrating as all hell. We're all living through this nightmare ourselves right now. And each night it feels like we're doing the same thing over and over again. And until there is that organizational change, the beatings will continue, folks. And it's very frustrating to see on a night in, night out basis. I know I don't have to tell you this. 20 losses in a row. Repeated it a lot here so far tonight. And it's not getting any better. A couple of comments here. Don Garcia over on Facebook said, this front office is so stupid. Just sign Crochet to an extension. That's a guy that came up in the system. Keep him. I've argued this point myself, Don, a number of times that if the likes of Brian Bannister, Ethan Katz, and the rest of your pitching infrastructure feel that Garrett Crochet has turned the corner from a health standpoint and is able to be a viable starting pitcher here, you try to find a way to keep him in the fold because he is pitched like a top-of-the-rotation arm here. Some of the things you hear that his representation is not willing to talk about a long-term deal right now. Maybe it's just with the White Sox, given the state of the organization here, which could very well be the case. And it kind of seems like maybe Crochet is someone that does want to maybe continue to show himself as a top-of-the-rotation starting pitcher and then test the free agent waters to see ultimately what he can do for himself from a financial standpoint. And that is his prerogative here. But I know if it were me, if I was the guy in charge of the organization and my pitching infrastructure told me that they thought that Garrett Crochet was going to be able to hold up long-term as a starting pitcher, I would be trying to do everything I could to keep him in the fold in this organization, because that is someone that you could definitely build around and build a credible, viable, contending starting rotation with. So, that's it's a really tough situation right now. But like I talked about a little bit earlier here, I feel like Garrett Crochet's days with the White Sox are numbered. I feel like we've probably got about 2 months left of seeing him here in a White Sox uniform. But to your point there, Don, if it were me, I would look to try to find a way to keep Garrett Crochet in a White Sox uniform long term if the people that handle the pitching infrastructure here felt that he was going to be able to be a starter long term. So that's kind of where we're at with Garrett Crochet here. So a couple of other off the field things that were circulating. We saw some rumor and innuendo about Pedro Grifol throwing the team under the bus in a team meeting at some point in July, stating that if this season unfolds with them having the worst record in baseball history, that it will ultimately be a reflection on the players, and it won't be a reflection on him, and it won't be a reflection on the coaches either. It'll be just on the players, to the point where Pedro had to actually come out and address this pregame earlier on in the week against the Kansas City Royals. Whether or not this is something that was said, it's kind of immaterial at this point, honestly. There has just been so much ineptitude displayed from Pedro Grifol. This is a guy that just simply is in over his skis and has a job that he simply is not qualified for, was never qualified for. And the comments that we see from him on an almost nightly basis just echo that sentiment, that he's just not cut out to be a major league manager here. And it does seem as though there is a level of distrust in that clubhouse. I think some of it may be a little bit overblown here, but when you're talking about a guy that is 100 games under 500 as a manager already, now look, obviously that's not all on him. This is not solely a Pedro Grifol issue, but at the end of the day, he has played a significant part in the failures of this team since the beginning of the 2023 season. So Pedro, obviously not doing himself any favors over the course of his tenure here, is going to breed the discussion about things like this happening in the clubhouse, about conversations like this, about him not trying to take accountability, and about there being infighting between the players and the coaching staff. When you have a team this bad, this is kind of par for the course, honestly. You see this all the time with historically shitty teams. And, Pedro Grifol and the 2024 White Sox are really no exception to that. Now, furthering up on that, there was some rumor and some speculation, and I even had some sources kind of off the record tell me that they thought that with the off day on Thursday, the travel day before this team headed up to Minnesota, there was a belief amongst many that Pedro Grifol was not going to be getting on that team plane and going to Minnesota to manage this past weekend here. We got word from Bob Nightingale, who we all know is very plugged in to the White Sox organization. He is a direct conduit to Jerry Reinsdorf himself. So a lot of times there are definitely pieces of information that come directly from the owner's box or from Brooks Boyer that go directly to Bob Nightingale, because he is really their chosen appointed national media mouthpiece in a lot of ways. And in his column here today, Nightingale talked about the fact that there was a closed-door meeting that took place, I believe it was Wednesday after the game, between Jerry Reinsdorf, GM Chris Getz, and Pedro Grifol surrounding his future. And the decision was made at that time not to remove Grifol as the manager here. But Bob did leave it open, the possibility that it could still happen at some point here before the conclusion of this 2024 season. You follow that up by comments from Ken Rosenthal, who is really the gold standard when it comes to national reporters, on the AJ Pierzynski Foul Territory podcast earlier on in the week. Alana Rizzo following it up on, I think it was High Heat, the show with Christopher Russo here. But if even national people are getting wind of this and talking about and questioning Pedro Grifol's future here before the end of the 2024 season, it leads me to believe that that seed is getting very hot, to the point where it's about to burst into flames here at any point. We know Jerry Reinsdorf does not like to fire managers in season. He has not done that since he fired Gene Lamont in May of 1995. So this is not something that we see happen very often. But at the end of the day, look, Pedro Grifol's under contract through next season. It is a sunk cost at this juncture. You have to pay the man his money no matter what happens. At this point, there is no downside to removing him. I can't think of another organization in professional sports that would allow this level of ineptitude to continue under the direction of Pedro Grifol. The 14-game losing streak was bad enough, but now we're at 20, 60 games below 500. There is not another organization in pro sports that would allow this to continue without a change being made. Yes, Grifol would be the sacrificial lamb at the end of the day. Yes, removing him and just sliding Charlie Montoyo over into the manager's chair isn't going to have any material impact or material change on the fate of the 2024 White Sox. It's symbolic, if nothing else. But this is a results-driven industry. And the fact of the matter is the results have not been there for Pedro Grifol. So the unwillingness of this organization, specifically Jerry Reinsdorf, because ultimately he is the one that makes these decisions here, to not remove Pedro Grifol from the manager's position is a direct indictment on their lack of commitment to getting this thing turned around, in my opinion. So that's kind of where we're at from the manager's standpoint. Moving on now, as we head into next week, the Sox are bordering their charter here shortly, I assume, heading out to the West Coast to take on the Oakland A's in Northern California, in the Bay Area for the final time. A's, as a franchise, moved there in 1968. As we all know, the saga surrounding the A's franchise and their proposed move to Las Vegas for the 2028 season. They will be playing next year in a AAA ballpark in the capital city of Sacramento. So this is the White Sox final trip to Oakland, and a place that really has been a house of horrors, especially over the course of the last 20 to 25 years for this team. I can't think of a more fitting place in a lot of ways for them to potentially match the 1961 Philadelphia Phillies record for longest losing streak in Major League history. So if the Sox drop the first 3 games of that series, and if on Wednesday afternoon, if they are unable to squeak out a win against an A's team, they will come home 23 consecutive losses, tied for the Major League record, and they will have their crosstown rivals waiting for them next Friday and Saturday for the final 2 games of the Crosstown Classic. And I think we all know collectively as a fan base that those suckwads across town and their fans want nothing more than to be the team to ultimately send the Sox to that 24th consecutive loss. So I am begging and I am pleading every person in that locker room and in that clubhouse, when you get to Oakland, find a way to win just one baseball game. Find a way to put an end to this thing. I don't feel very confident that it's going to happen, but for the love of God, find a way to win a baseball game. A little bit of additional speculation as we head to the opening of that series tomorrow night. It'll be at 9:05, first pitch. Kai Busch, the second piece of the deal from the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim of Orange County of California that came over in the Lucas Giolito deal a year ago, was scratched from his start in AAA Charlotte this evening, leading to a lot of belief that he is going to be getting the ball tomorrow to make his Major League debut. Busch has actually thrown the ball very well this season across AA Birmingham and AAA Charlotte for the Sox affiliates, to the point where he has garnered, potential starts for this team down the stretch here, and particularly given the injury to Drew Thorpe, who just came up a couple of months ago here, was really the centerpiece of the deal from the San Diego Padres that sent Dylan Cease out west earlier on in this season. Busch would be taking Thorpe's spot in the rotation, as Drew Thorpe has had to go on the injured list with a flexor strain in his right forearm. And for those of you who don't know, the flexor strain is oftentimes the precursor to the dreaded Tommy John. And Thorpe had two really rough outings. His last two starts against the Seattle Mariners and against the Kansas City Royals here. And some speculation and some people wondering, maybe was injury a part of the issue that we saw with the consecutive rough outings for Drew Thorpe. So there is no diagnosis of Tommy John or of a UCL tear at this point, but this is something that we have to be mindful of now here. That flexor strain, like I said, is oftentimes the precursor to the ulnar collateral ligament snapping and the requirement for Tommy John surgery. We saw this with Garrett Crochet, famously following the 2020 AL wildcard game in Oakland, the game 3, when he had to exit early. And subsequently, Crochet was able to get through all of 2020-21 of the Sox bullpen, but then ultimately the UCL did snap during spring training of 2022. So this is unfortunately something that we have to be on watch for with Drew Thorpe. Wouldn't shock me at all if we do not see him for the remainder of this season here. Hopefully they can try to get him right, get him rehabbed and ready to go for spring training when pitchers and catchers report to Glendale in February. But something we have to be very concerned about now with the guy that was the centerpiece of the deal for Dylan Cease just a couple of months ago here. So that's about all I've got for us here today on a not so fun edition of the Sox on Tap Sunday Funday show. 0-6, 20 losses in a row. Not really much positive that can be said at this point. The beat goes on, as they like to say. Hopefully this team can find some way to seal one game out in Oakland this week, put an end to this losing streak so that they don't equal that 23 consecutive losses from the 1961 Philadelphia Phillies before they come home next weekend. So here's to hoping they are able to squeak one out in Northern California, their final trip to Oakland against the Athletics. That's going to wrap it up for us here tonight. As always, please go to ontapsportsnet.com for all your Chicago sports literature and podcasting needs. Signing off for the Sox on Tap postgame show, NWI Steve, White Sox for life.